I never thought I'd be standing here, telling a story that I've kept locked away, buried deep in the corners of my mind. Yet here I am, ready to share something that has haunted me, shaped me, and changed everything I thought I knew about myself and the person I love the most. It started on what seemed like a regular evening. The kind where you're wrapped in the quiet routines of marriage. The smell of dinner still lingered in the kitchen, the soft flicker of a forgotten candle burned low on the coffee table, and we sat side by side in the dim glow of our living room. It was peaceful, predictable, almost boring. Or so I thought. Then he looked at me, and there was something different in his eyes. Something I couldn't quite read, like he was bracing himself to say words that would change everything between us. My heart beat faster, but I told myself not to overthink it, not to make a big deal out of a moment that would probably pass as quickly as it came. But it didn't pass. Instead, he opened his mouth, and what he said shattered the reality I had clung to so desperately. I wish I could say that I knew how to react, that I had answers, or even the strength to understand what he was asking of me. But I didn't. In that moment, a storm I never saw coming swept through our lives, a storm that forced me to confront my deepest fears, my strongest desires, and the limits of what I thought I was capable of. This isn't an easy story to tell, and it's one that's taken me a long time to process. But I'm ready to share it, piece by painful piece. Because some truths are too heavy to keep hidden forever. And as you hear what happened, I want you to ask yourself, how far would you go for the person you love? How much of yourself would you be willing to give up just to hold on to something that already felt like it was slipping away? We had been married for years, and when I think back, I can still remember the early days like they were yesterday. Those first few months, when we couldn't get enough of each other, late-night talks, spontaneous weekend trips, the kind of love that feels like it could conquer anything. I was convinced we were solid, like nothing could ever break the bond we shared. But looking back now, I see the cracks I didn't notice at the time. I guess that's how it always is, right? We think we have it all figured out until life has a way of proving us wrong. For the longest time, everything felt like it was just working. I'd wake up next to him, thinking we were happy, that things would only get better as we grew older. But somewhere along the way, things started to shift, and neither of us knew how to stop it. It wasn't sudden, not some dramatic fight or a huge betrayal, it was subtle at first, just little things that started to add up. The quiet dinners with barely any conversation. The way he'd come home later and later from work, or how he'd retreat into his phone, never really there when we were together. At some point, I couldn't ignore it any longer. We were becoming strangers in our own home. The affection that used to flow so easily between us had become more like an afterthought. The intimacy we shared was replaced with awkward silences. And I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both just waiting for the other person to make the first move to fix it, but neither of us knew how. I remember one night, after another round of forced conversation, I looked at him, trying to find the man I once knew, but all I saw was someone I didn't recognize. It felt like we were living in different worlds, connected by nothing more than the memory of a love that seemed to have faded. I didn't want to give up. I couldn't. But I had no idea how to fight for something that felt like it was slipping away. Then, one evening, he came to me with a look I hadn't seen in a long time. He was quiet, almost too calm, and the moment he sat down across from me, I knew something was different. He stared at me for a few seconds before he spoke, and I could feel my heart race, but I didn't know why. His voice was steady as he said he had a solution for our problems, a way to fix what was broken between us. I remember staring at him, wondering what in the world he was talking about. He wasn't angry, he wasn't frustrated, but there was something in his eyes that felt like a decision had already been made. He was asking me, or more like telling me, that this was the only way forward. And then he explained what he meant. I honestly thought I misheard him at first. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It sounded like something out of a bad dream, like a test that no one would ever want to pass. But there it was, hanging in the air between us. I wanted to scream, to shut it down, to demand that we just find another way, but I couldn't. I didn't know what to say, or how to react. And in that moment, I realized that everything I thought I knew about our marriage was now on the table, ready to be torn apart and rebuilt in a way I never could have imagined. What he suggested, it was a bombshell, and my world was never going to be the same again. I was stunned. I could hardly breathe, my mind racing as I tried to process what he just said. His words felt like a punch to the gut, and for a long moment, I just sat there, frozen. How could he ask me to do this? How could he suggest something so wrong? The man I loved, the man I had built a life with, was asking me to cross a line that, until that point, I never thought would be on the table. Was this really the person I married? My mind screamed no, but my heart was pounding in my chest, wondering if I was missing something. I could feel the anger rising in me, a mixture of disbelief and hurt. How could he be so calm, so sure that this was the answer? My whole body was screaming for me to walk away, to shut it all down, to refuse his request without a second thought. But I didn't. I couldn't. The words caught in my throat, and the tears that I had been holding back for so long suddenly felt too big to control. He had never looked at me like that before, so desperate, so convinced that this would work. His eyes were pleading with me, like I was the only person who could save us, but all I felt was the weight of the pressure he was putting on me. He kept talking, explaining how this would fix everything, how this was the only way to bring us back together, to ignite something between us that had long since gone out. Each word felt like it was chipping away at my resolve. He made it sound so rational, so necessary for our survival. The more he spoke, the more I began to question myself. Was he right? Could this actually work? What if this was the last chance we had to save our marriage? What if I was the one standing in the way of our future? The guilt, the confusion, the hurt, all of it mixed together into this heavy feeling of helplessness. I didn't know if I was being manipulated or if I was just too broken to see the truth anymore. I spent nights lying awake, tossing and turning, my mind racing through every possible scenario. I wanted to scream, to push him away, to walk out the door and never look back. But the thought of losing him, of everything we had built collapsing, it was unbearable. The fear of losing him was bigger than the fear of whatever he was asking me to do. I had to make a choice, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't just ignore him. I loved him. And despite everything, I didn't want to give up on us, not without trying, not without doing what he said would fix things. Eventually, after countless sleepless nights and tearful conversations, I found myself agreeing to something I never thought I would. Not because I wanted to. Not because it felt right. But because I loved him, and in that moment, it felt like the only choice I had left. The fear of losing him, of never finding a way back to the connection we once had, made me second-guess everything I believed about myself. I said yes, and the moment the words left my mouth, I felt both a strange sense of relief and a deep, aching sense of dread. I didn't know how it would change me, how it would change us, but I couldn't take it back. And there was no turning back from that moment. The day arrived, and I remember feeling like I was about to step off a cliff. My heart was pounding in my chest, my palms slick with sweat, and my mind was spinning with 1,000 thoughts I couldn't make sense of. Could I really do this? Could I go through with something so far beyond the realm of what I ever imagined? I kept asking myself, what am I doing? But there was no answer. I was too far in. I had made a choice, or at least, I had convinced myself it was the only choice I had left. But every step I took towards that moment felt like I was walking toward my own undoing. I felt trapped in my own mind, caught in this nightmare I never expected. My body was shaking, but my feet moved forward anyway, because I had no other choice. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. As I prepared myself, I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, wondering if there was some way to turn back, some way to undo this terrible decision. I tried to focus on anything other than the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I tried to tell myself that this was just another step, a necessary one, to save everything I had left. But nothing felt right. The house felt eerily quiet, like a stillness before a storm. Every breath felt heavier than the last, every minute dragging on longer than the one before. The clock ticked away, and all I could do was wait for the moment to come. My body was there, but my mind was elsewhere, lost in the chaos of confusion and dread. And then, the moment arrived. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, my hands trembling as I walked into the room where everything was about to unfold. The nerves in my body screamed for me to stop, to turn around and leave, to forget this had ever been suggested. But I couldn't. I was committed, whether I liked it or not. And as the door closed behind me, it was like the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the present, only the situation I had stepped into, and it was suffocating me. I tried to calm my racing thoughts, but I couldn't. I felt like I was drowning in the gravity of the situation, every move I made weighing me down more and more. I was frozen in place, caught between fear and guilt, trapped in this moment that I couldn't escape. I was in over my head, and the water was rising fast. At first, I was petrified. The anxiety was unbearable, and every inch of my body felt like it wasn't mine anymore. I couldn't breathe properly, and I could feel the cold sweat gathering at the back of my neck. The tension in my chest was suffocating, like my heart was too big for my body. My hands were clammy, my face burning with embarrassment, and I couldn't even look anyone in the eye. I felt utterly out of place, like I was playing a part one was never meant to play. Everything felt wrong, but it didn't stop. It kept happening, and I couldn't find a way to stop it. The guilt, the shame, they crushed me, but I couldn't stop myself from moving forward. I wanted to scream, to run, to say no. But nothing came out. Instead, I just stayed there, frozen, feeling like I was losing myself with every passing second. But then, something unexpected happened. I don't know when it started, but as the moments passed, I began to feel something else. Something I didn't expect. A strange sense of freedom. A part of me that had been locked away for so long started to awaken. It was like I was shedding something heavy, something that had been weighing me down for months. And for a split second, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel like I was a prisoner of my own mind. I felt lighter, freer, and I hated myself for it. I hated myself because I knew it didn't feel right, but it was also a release, something I had been craving in the silence of my own desperation. And that terrified me even more. How could something that felt so freeing also feel so wrong? Through it all, I kept glancing at him. I needed reassurance, comfort, something to help me understand what I was doing. But what I saw in his eyes stunned me even more. He was watching me with an intensity that I couldn't ignore, and his gaze was not full of guilt or concern. No, his expression was one of satisfaction, of desire fulfilled. It hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't about us, about saving our marriage. This wasn't even about me. This was something else entirely. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw a side of him I hadn't recognized before, almost like a stranger. I felt a wave of betrayal, a deep, gut-wrenching realization that what I had agreed to was never about repairing what was broken. It wasn't about love. It was about something darker, something I wasn't prepared for. In that moment, I wanted to pull away, to scream, to run. But I couldn't. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. No matter how much I wanted to undo it, I couldn't. The weight of everything I had just experienced was too much to carry, and I knew that I had to live with the consequences of what had just happened. The tears I had been holding back for so long finally started to fall, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. I had done it, and now I had to face what that meant, not just for our marriage, but for me. And in that moment, I realized that the hardest part wasn't what had just happened. It was the person I saw in the mirror, the one who had agreed to this. The person I had just become. I thought it would end there. I told myself that once it was done, things would go back to normal. That maybe we could go back to what we had before, rebuild what felt shattered, and find our way back to the love we once knew. But it didn't. It couldn't. The guilt lingered, sitting heavily on my chest every moment of every day. At first, I tried to ignore it, to pretend that I could bury it deep enough that it would eventually fade. But it didn't. It was like a shadow, always hanging over me, constantly reminding me of what I had done. The confusion was unbearable as I tried to figure out what had happened to me, to us, and where we had gone wrong. I'd hoped that once it was over, I'd feel relief, that the weight would lift, but it only deepened. It was like I had opened a door to something I could never close again. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. I would lie in bed at night, replaying every moment in my head, wondering what I could have done differently, how I could have stopped myself from saying yes. But it was too late. The emotional mess I had gotten myself into only grew worse. There were moments when I looked at him and I couldn't recognize the man I had once known. I kept searching for the connection we once had, hoping it would still be there somewhere beneath the surface. But it wasn't. The distance between us became something tangible, something I could feel in the silence that now filled our home. We couldn't pretend that things were fine. We couldn't act like nothing had changed. Even when we tried to talk, to pick up where we left off, the words felt hollow. There was this coldness between us, something that neither of us knew how to fix. I felt like I was floating in a sea of emptiness, unsure of where I stood, unsure of what I wanted, or even who I was anymore. Everything had shifted, and I couldn't find my way back. I wanted to, desperately, but every time I tried, it was like pushing against a wall that wouldn't budge. And what made it worse was that part of me felt empowered. But not in the way I had hoped. This wasn't strength, it was something darker, something that terrified me. I felt like a different person, someone I didn't recognize. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the strange sense of freedom that came with it, freedom from the person I had been before. A freedom that felt like a release, but also a loss. I had awoken a part of myself I never thought I'd have to face, and I wasn't sure I could handle it. But what I couldn't shake was the realization that it was all for nothing. No matter how many times I looked at him, no matter how much I tried to make sense of everything, I knew that I had lost something precious. I had lost more than I could ever get back. What I thought was a solution, a way to fix our marriage, turned out to be the thing that destroyed it. And no amount of trying to fix it after the fact could make it right. There was no undoing what had been done. I couldn't erase the feelings, the guilt, or the cracks that had formed between us. Our marriage wasn't just damaged, it was shattered in ways that couldn't be repaired. The person I was before this moment, the person I thought I knew, was gone. In its place was someone who didn't know how to look at herself in the mirror anymore. Someone who didn't know if she would ever be able to trust herself again. The fear of losing everything had driven me to make choices I never thought I would. And now, I had to live with the aftermath of that choice. The hardest part was coming to terms with the fact that there was no going back. No matter how much I wanted to undo it all, to erase the damage, I couldn't. What happened between us wasn't just a mistake, it was a point of no return. I had changed. Our marriage had changed. And no matter how much I tried to put the pieces back together, they never quite fit again. I realized that some things can't be fixed. Some things can't be undone. The price of trying to fix it was far higher than I ever imagined. And maybe that was the hardest lesson of all, that some parts of you, some decisions you make, change you forever. They leave scars that time can't heal, and no matter how hard you try, you can't get back what you lost along the way. I learned the hard way that some choices can't be undone, no matter how badly you wish you could. And in the end, I wasn't sure if I had fixed our marriage, or if I had broken it beyond repair. I still wonder if I made the right choice. Every day, I question whether there was another way, another path I could have taken. Would you have done the same to save your marriage? Or are some boundaries just too sacred to cross? These are the questions that haunt me. And I'm left wondering if, in trying to fix something, I only made it worse. Maybe some things should never be touched, no matter how badly we want them to work. The price of crossing those lines, it's more than you think. I'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Did I make the right choice? Have you ever faced something like this? I never imagined I'd be telling a story like this, but here I am, and I know it's something others can relate to. It's a story of pain, of growth, of decisions that change us in ways we can't always predict. Thank you for being here and listening to my truth. It's never easy to share something so personal, but I appreciate you taking the time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to catch more stories. The secrets, the scandals, they never end. And I'll be back with more.